Rev up your engines! Alright, we got a 2015 Ford Escape. It smokes like mad on startup, and we're gonna use a spoon to figure out what the problem is. Yeah, I'm not making it up. This spoon. And my wife will be furious because it's one of her spoons. A good thing she doesn't watch my videos. Now, the customer bought this used with 60,000 miles. He's put about another 60,000 miles on it. He paid it off early, so he owns it. And when he starts it up first thing in the morning, it smokes a lot of gray, almost like a diesel. But then it goes away. And interestingly enough, it needs an oil change. So the oil's dirty, but it's still completely full, so it's not burning any oil. We're gonna figure out why it's doing it. Now, this is a 1.6 liter, 4-cylinder, inline, GDI engine, gasoline direction engine, and it's also turbocharged. That's what the EcoBoost stands for. And after a bunch of pulling and shoving, because Ford has one here that's almost impossible to get off, but it does, there's no bolts. We'll take the obnoxious beauty cover off, show you what's happening. It has coil on plug, but you notice on the intake, you don't see any fuel injectors because this is gasoline direct injection. The fuel injectors work at super high pressure, and it also has a turbocharger on it. It's very complex. They're piezoelectric injectors that can put over 1,000 psi pressure to spray the gas in the engine. All that pressure, when you combine it with the pressure of a turbocharger ramming extra air in the engine, strains the engines a lot. And positively for this engine, on the positive side, hey, it needs an oil change, but the oil's still full. It isn't using any oil. The 1.6s were better engines, but still, it smokes like mad first thing in the morning. So what we're gonna do is the ultimate engine test that anybody can do. Wet dry compression test of the engine. We'll see what kind of shape the engine is this. Now, this is the one advantage of a 4-cylinder engine. If you got a V6 engine and you're gonna do a compression test, most of the 9 modern engine designs have one of the 3-cylinder bank, either bank 1 or bank 2, covered by the intake manifold. So in order to take the compression test of those, you have to pull the intake manifold off, which is a royal pain in the behind. This is a 4, so it's easier to do. First, we gotta take the coil on plugs off to access the plugs. You can see they're on the top, so. Good design there, they're easy to get to. Awful long thread for a little bitty coil, but hey. For some unknown reason, Ford has 2 bolts holding the plastic coils on. I don't understand these engineers, but then again, it is Ford. Now this to me makes no sense. They want to make them as cheap as possible. Why on earth do they put 2 bolts to hold the coil in place? I mean, it's total insanity. But now we can push things out of the way and wiggle it and get the coil on. They really didn't care about making them easy to work on, that's for sure. A lot of wiggling, and if the camera wasn't running, a lot of swearing, which I won't do right now. We'll get it out. We gotta take them all out. Now we'll wiggle them all, get them all out. You gotta wiggle them because they get stuck. With 130,000 miles, they're gonna have a lot of stickiness to them. There's number 2, number 3, and number 4, the last one. Of course, it'll be the stinker. All right, we got them all out. Now we gotta take the spark plugs out. We're gonna take all the spark plugs out. We need a magnet for this one. Nothing's accessible. Curse the engineers that designed these things. Now these plugs have been in here. These are the original ones. So we might as well change them. All right, now the fun comes. We got the spark plugs out. We're gonna do a dry compression test. Just the compression reading using a gauge. So the test is screwed in. You crank the engine. Okay, write down the readings for all 4. Okay, crank it again. Okay, now in this case, they're all about 155 pounds, give or take 3 or 4 pounds here and there, and that's normal. What you do, it's called relative compression, because none of these gauges are perfectly accurate. You want decent pressure like that, and you want it so that they're all about the same, and they are. So now what you do is get a teaspoonful of oil, about a teaspoon, and put them in 1 cylinder at a time. First we'll put it in the front cylinder, then we'll test the pressure again, crank it. Okay, and we'll do it for all 4 and compare them. What we're testing for here is the differential. If the pressure goes up quite a bit, that would mean the piston rings are worn, and that tiny bit of oil would make the pressure go higher because the oil seals it for the test. But let's say the pressure was low on one of them. These are all the same, so it doesn't matter all that much. But say one had a lower pressure, and then when you put the oil in, the other ones, the pressure went up 4 or 5 pounds, but that one, was the same or even less, that would mean that the valve seals are bad on that cylinder, because the valve seals aren't affected by oil. They're on the top of the engine. And that would mean they're leaking and they're sucking oil in and it's burning oil. Now in this case, they hardly changed at all, just a few pounds. But that doesn't surprise me, because if you look at these spark plugs, these are the original spark plugs. If it burned a bunch of oil, they'd be covered in oil carbon and black. They aren't. So this engine is actually in pretty good shape. Now, since these are the original plugs, we're going to put new ones in. Get the same ones, exact same ones. They lasted so long. You want to put the same ones back in. They cost more, but what the heck. Make sure you don't cross-thread them. A lot of wiggling is needed. You want to get them snug, not too tight. You don't want to break them. These things are chrome-plated. They're made so that they're torqued in just right. If you lubricate them, they'll pop out. I've seen guys lubricate them. Oh, we don't want them to get stuck. Then later they're driving their own, they pop out of the holes. Just put them in dry. Of course, you got to put all the coil packs back on. Wow, that one actually went on smoothly. Now you got to put on the 8 bolts to hold it in place. No one knows why they used 8 instead of 4, but then again, there's Ford. Now you want to get these on snug, because they don't just hold them on, they help ground them. If you don't get them tight and you screw up in this last thing, it'll start misfiring and you'll wonder what the heck did I do wrong. You got to get them tight because they help ground the coils. So when they're tying them up, basically turn them where, you see, now it's snug, and then just give it a little more tug. It's plastic. You don't want to crack it, but you want to get it snug. That's the best way to do it. Then throw the stupid beauty cover back on. Me, I'd throw it out, but what the hell, it's here. So let's start it up now. You can see there's a little smoke coming out. And as you see, once he revs it up, it stopped smoking. But now the check engine light come on, and you see cylinder number 3 has a misfire detected. Now, this often will happen. So 1, 2, this is number 3. You saw the process of taking them off. They're hellacious to get off. They're rubber and they bend. Well, guess what? They got all that mileage on it, over 100,000 miles. A lot of times, you take them out, the coils go bad because they're rubber and plastic. You take them apart, you got to bend them to get it out. It's the only way you can do it. They'll often break. Now here's the old one. It looks perfectly fine, but it's all electronic charges. You got to bend them and stuff. A lot of times, it just goes out. So we'll get another coil for this one. But before we rush to conclusions, I'm going to put the number 3 coil on the number 2 and the 2 on the 3 and see if it moves. Then we'll know the coil's gone. Now, of course, before we do anything, we got to turn the key on. Then got to erase the code. So we'll go to erase codes. Yes. All right. It erased the code. So now let's erase and start it up. And we'll take it for a good ride. Now it's running really good. 127,000 miles. In the drag strip land, let's really give it a test. Not a race car, but here we go. Sounds good. No misfires. I'm impressed by Escape with this many miles on it. The main reason I'm dumping on it hard is I want to see if the misfire will come back, and so far it hasn't, but we're going to drive it some more. Ran like a clock. You can see the check engine light isn't on anymore. And we'll check for codes. There's no freeze frame data. It's running fine. So in this case, what's the lesson to be learned? Always double check everything. When we switch those coils, it stopped misfiring. So what happened somehow, when it was reinstalled, that coil must have been rubbing on something. And when we moved it, it wasn't rubbing anymore, because we didn't even unplug the electrical connection on that one when we took it out. So it's not like, well, we didn't plug it in right. It wasn't even disconnected. You'll find stuff like that happens with all that rubber crap when you can't reach and see inside. Now, who the heck knows? If in a few days it starts misfiring, and the misfire is on cylinder number 2 because we put the number 3 coil on number 2, we would just change the coil. But in this case, we don't have to. Well, now let's get back to it smoking in the morning. I just learned something from the owner. This has been going on for a year and a half. He starts it, you get smoke, and then it goes right away after a few seconds of driving it. But interestingly enough, this happened right after he took it to the Ford dealer for some updates, servicing. Well, I just figured out why it does what it's doing. Obviously, they reprogrammed the computer. The way cars work these days are, when you start the car cold, the fuel injection system has to pulse the fuel injectors a little bit longer, more milliseconds than usual, to spray extra gas to start a cold engine. Obviously, this thing has been reprogrammed with incorrect software that it starts it, it makes it too rich. So he gets the smoke coming out of the back because it's only when you start it. Now, seeing that the Ford dealer did this in the first place, he says, is it gonna hurt anything? I said, not gonna hurt anything. And if you took it back, they charge 90 bucks just to look at it. They'll never admit a year and a half later that, you know, they messed up with something. So he'll probably just live with this. It's not hurting anything because he's been doing it for a year and a half and it hasn't gotten any worse. He does not lose coolant. He doesn't burn any engine oil. So obviously, they reprogrammed it incorrectly, making it too rich, so it gives a little bit too much gas only when it's ice cold. Probably he's gonna live with it. Now, Ford, if you're watching this and you know that, hey, we had a reprogramming failure, please contact me and I'll call them up and say, look, they'll reprogram it for free. I doubt if it will happen. Most of the manufacturers no longer like me for telling the truth about mistakes they make, but it makes total logical sense now. And like I say, he's been driving it this way for a year and a half, and yeah, it was a smart move. He needed spark plugs, they were the original ones anyways. The only thing that I gotta say about that is, well, I'll keep you in touch with what happens, but those spark plugs were the original spark plugs. Maybe they didn't fire right in the beginning. So if it no longer smokes, he'll tell me the next few days, then that actually fixes it. But if it continues to smoke, that would mean they just made the fuel injection mixture too rich upon cold startup. It could be reprogrammed, but like I say, that's another ball of wax. It runs fine, so he'll probably live with it if it continues to. We'll find out. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.